I'm really glad to be here. This is a completely different crowd for me than I'm used to. The average newspaper reader in Holland is 53 years old. Is there anyone over 53 years old in this room? Oh, one newspaper reader. Welcome. No newspapers? Okay, maybe we should move it up. I'm a little behind with the numbers, so maybe it's now, 65 probably. And just out of curiosity, who would say from themselves that you're following the US elections? Oh, almost everyone. Okay, well, that's very nice. So a little bit about myself. I'm a political scientist by education, but I started writing really early. I wrote my first article, I published my first article in 1999 for a blog called foxine.net. It's actually a Rotterdam native site. I published my first article for Money in 2005. And since 2010, I work for Vrij Nederland, which is a magazine here from Amsterdam. And it's a little bit similar, if you're used to American magazines, to The Atlantic, I guess. And after this weekend, I will move to NRC Handelsblad, which is a big newspaper. But as Daniel told you, I was in the US last year, and I worked at Harvard as a Nieman Fellow. This is where I lived. This is Boston, that you see here in the front, and Cambridge is in the back. And a fellowship could mean basically everything in the US. It's not that you're not a student anymore, but you're not a professor either. You're somewhere in between. You're employed by the university and you can do whatever. In my case, I was a journalist working at Harvard, and I followed workshops and I gave workshops for a year. And I wasn't allowed to write, which was really interesting for me. And it was a great place to live. I have to say, I really miss it almost every day, because this is such a green, such a beautiful place to live, full of bunnies and butterflies and sparrows, and they have big trees and small coffee shops, and you can, there are actually chairs on the street where you can just sit and read your book if you want, and nobody takes the chairs, and you can leave your bike unlocked. It's really beautiful. And what I also realized was that I was living in the factory of the 1%. This is where the front row kids are made. It's really the most privileged place in the world. And now that I've seen this side of the line, I have to tell you, we're really ready for Donald Trump right now. Because what I saw here is that this side of the world, these people that live here and grow up here, these are the people that are winning. Not only economically, they make much more than everyone else in this, than everyone in this room, but they're also winning politically and culturally. This is where Obama also studied. This is the region where the Clintons are from, and where all the Harvard Business School investors that are now taking over Silicon Valley are from. And nobody, really nobody here, really tries to speak to the back row, the people that are not ambitious and don't want to move around in the world. And the only one that's actually trying to do that is Donald Trump. So maybe he won't make America great again, but at least he will make it better. You're all looking really frightened right now. Of course, I'm kidding. I really hope that Hillary Clinton is going to win. But I thought this is a really good way to describe myself, because in this state of journalism, people have to know where you're talking from and what your political opinion is. People want to know. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, people want to know where you are in the Rolodex. They want you to. You need to tick a box somewhere. Are you a Bernie Sanders fan that hates Silicon Valley? Or are you a techie that hates government interference? Do you think that everyone is mad and that Clinton should be president? It should be clear for them, because whenever your employer needs someone, they're going to look in the Rolodex and try to find you. And they want it to be clear where you're from. Often students ask me, when I speak to them, how you can still be a journalist in this world where media is collapsing so fast and there's so few money. And this is always what I recommend to them. Just make clear where you're from, where you're reasoning from. So put it in your, there's so many ways to show the people your background. Put it in your Twitter biography, or put it in your Instagram. Start a blog and just put on top of the blog, I'm Tim de Gier and I'm willing to defend Donald Trump on television or in your paper. Just make it easy for the employers. I guess that's what it is. And this is what transparency currently does to journalism. I want to talk to you about transparency today because I think it's the best of times and it's the worst of times, as Charles Dickens wrote, also in journalism right now. And it also makes it easier for lots of journalists to really create a character out of yourself. And you see lots of people on Twitter that just put in their biography and say, I'm an intersectional feminist, and then start sharing pieces about feminism. Or I'm lefty, and then share a lot of pieces about Bernie Sanders and about how bad Hillary Clinton is. Or I'm I'm very critical of technology. You see that quite often. For me, I find this kind of difficult. Because maybe it's because I'm a political scientist. I'm never really sure where I stand, and it changes very fast. I think this is also the way I read newspapers or magazines. I like people to convince me. So during these elections, actually from the beginning, I really didn't understand why Hillary was in these elections. I don't know really what moves her, why she wants to do this after all these years. She's been in and around the White House since 1992. And when I was in Cambridge, I went to a Bernie Sanders rally. And it was amazing. It was full of people like this, basically. It was so much younger than the normal political rally. If you go to Clinton or Trump, you will see that everyone is the average age of a newspaper reader. But when you go to Bernie Sanders rally, there were 15,000 people in a venue just to hear him speak. And he speaks like a socialist leader, like Chavez, speeches of 1.5 hours, and then just discussing every subject he can think of. It's really the worst speeches ever, but everyone was so enthusiastic. It was great. And the substance was good. And that's I guess, all that matters. But for me, I don't think that Bernie Sanders is going to be the solution to all the problems of the Democratic Party. He's not going to be the solution to Trump. But this makes it really complicated for a journalist. Because people don't really understand what a fellow is. So I came back this summer, I was a Nieman Fellow, and I was a little bit anti-Clinton, but I also hoped that Clinton would beat Donald Trump. I like Bernie Sanders, I preferred Bernie Sanders over Hillary, but I didn't think he was the solution to everything. You can really forget it if you want to talk about American elections with a profile like that. Philosophers are using a famous example recently, and I'd like to, I can use that to show you how that works, how it makes it difficult for a journalist. So think of a couple of years ago, there was this case with Cecil the lion that was shot. There was also a case with a rhino, a wealthy English hunter, shot a rhino somewhere in Tanzania, and everyone was really outraged by it because the rhinos are really threatened as a species. And he just took a picture of the rhino that he shot and posed next to it. And it would be easy for a journalist, maybe, if you just say, well, this is terrible that this happened, this is really terrible, and I don't give a shit that hunters also bring a lot of money to Tanzania, but you shouldn't shoot as a rare species like a rhino. And you can make a living out of that, just writing pieces like that and defending that argument. Then after a while, you find out that there's something really specific with these rhinos that they shoot. They actually pay the hunters to come to the communities and shoot specific rhinos in the regions. Because when a rhino reaches a certain age, it's not fertile anymore, it can't reproduce anymore. And they get really jealous of people that can still have babies. And they start attacking them. And they kill young couples, actually, because they're most often stronger and more aggressive because they're sexually frustrated, I guess. So that's why they shoot the rhinos. And then, so you just wrote a piece about how bad it is that they shoot the rhino. What do you do in the next step as a journalist? Are you able to change your mind? I find this really difficult because I just defended 1 week before. I just said, it's really bad that they shoot rhinos. Okay, so after much elaboration, I changed my mind and I write, no, they actually should shoot those rhinos, but it should be regulated and we shouldn't be too proud of it. And then the next week, somebody in a bar, you talk to them about this story, and then someone in a bar says, but I don't think you should ever be proud of shooting a rare species and put pictures in the papers and on your social media about it, because that just inspires other people, other hunters, to do exactly the same, and maybe illegally. And then I thought, yeah, that's also right. So what do? Do you change your opinion again? This is also, I put up this picture. This is also because there's such an information overload. There's so much competition at the moment in journalism that you need to stand out. You need to be clear for the reader and for the employer. This is a picture of information overload. Okay, but then, of course, as me being me, it's also a good thing, transparency for journalism, because what I saw in the States when I lived in Boston, in Cambridge, the little village with the bunnies and the butterflies, is that the New York Times and the Washington Post really came under much scrutiny during these elections. Almost all the students from my seminars that I was attending in Harvard were really anti the big papers. They were just really angry at them for first only celebrating Hillary, and for then ignoring Donald Trump, and then after a while only writing about Donald Trump. And they really felt like this is this logic of media that really brought us into the position where we are now. And I was one night sitting in a bar in Cambridge here, at the bar actually, and there were two journalists from Holland visiting, the editor of Philosophy magazine and the editor of the humanistic broadcasting company. It's called Human here in the Netherlands. And I told them about this problem, and I said, well, I think the media should have been really critical at Donald Trump from the very first beginning, because he was just telling bullshit and he's a racist bigot, and they refused to write that in the beginning. In the beginning it was all, oh, look at this really interesting candidate and he's such a brilliant campaigner. It really made me angry, and also lots of students at Harvard. And then the journalists, they looked at me while I was talking, and they got a little bit, they were a little bit older than me, and they got a little bit upset. And they said, well, this is terrible if this is happening to journalism, because journalists should be objective, and journalists should be neutral, and you should be the fly on the wall, and you're an outsider in society, and you're just describing, you're informing your audience, because they need to know also, there's also probably Trump supporters in this room. Well, is anyone Trump supporter in this room? Probably the wrong audience. But I think that's actually a big problem. Objectivity doesn't exist. It never existed before. And the New York Times and the Washington Post and many of the Dutch newspapers right now, they're not objective. They have a political opinion as well, but it's really subtle. If you cover the elections like a campaign. And you're saying, well, this is happening in the polls, and this is contradicting an earlier statement, and this was a really good performance on television. Then what you're actually implying is that politics is all about campaigning and not about the big ideas in the world. You find it actually really confusing when someone like Bernie Sanders really says, we should get rid of the banks. Journalists get really upset if you say something like that, because that's a big idea. They don't want to hear that. They just want to say, yeah, but what is he saying? This is really naive. How do you get that through Congress? And what bill would it constitute? And they're actually implying that they support a really technical vision of politics. And Bernie Sanders was completely chanceless in the face of that. So from the very first beginning, the New York Times said, no, we shouldn't vote Bernie Sanders because Bernie Sanders has horrible speeches and he's probably not really reaching the center-right audience like Hillary Clinton is, and his ideas are really revolutionary, and how do you ever get support for that? And that meant from the very first beginning that they were supporting Hillary, and they still are. And that's why I also understand why Trump is always saying, the media is rigged, they just want Hillary Clinton. And they really created this problem for themselves, I think. So I was talking to this journalist, and we got all very angry at each other and started shouting and had more wine, and it was a really great evening. And I spent a lot of time on Twitter and Facebook while I was in the US, complaining to Dutch correspondents that were covering the elections, and they only use Washington Post and CNN and the New York Times as their sources. And then you create this whole world again of campaign journalism and not journalism about actual issues. So I was complaining to the Dutch correspondents, and when I came back a couple of weeks ago, I ran into Guus Valk of the NRC, who's a Dutch correspondent in the US. And he said, hey, Tim, so good to meet you. And I thought he would be really angry at me. And, but that's of course not how it works. If you can agree to disagree, and that's all very good. So what I think you should be doing is, or what I try to do is, I feel well defending an argument, but also being open to to counter arguments. So I try to write pieces like, Trump is bad because, or Hillary is bad because. And if you can contradict me, and if you got a good argument, I will change my position. I will try to do that, but I also know that it's a long game. Changing your mind is a fundamental part of good journalism, but it's the long run. It's not the easiest way to the top right now. So I would say, maybe I can make a thesis, antithesis, synthesis. If you're starting as a journalist right now in 2016, you need to be clear about where you come from. You need to try to defend your arguments and try to make an argument. Don't consider yourself to be completely outside of society, because you're not. But try to change your mind if you can and if you dare. That's it. Thank you.